Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this Turing stage. We're going to be hearing some more research presentations in this session. Just a quick FYI, you might have seen that there was 4 headshots there. Unfortunately, Flora couldn't make it here today to speak to us, but Richard will be covering for her in their talk. But without further ado, let's get on to the very first presentation. I'm delighted to introduce Professor Casper Althofer, Professor of Robotics Engineering at Queen Mary University, London, who's going to be showcasing some work on soft robotics. Over to you, Casper.
Yeah, hi, Gemma. Thanks for introduction. Great to be here. I'm from the Center for Advanced Robotics at Queen Mary, and I would like to talk about our Turing project, Turing-sponsored project on human-robot tool handover. And today in my presentation, I would like to look at the aspect of embodied intelligence. So you might wonder, what has soft robotics to do with human-robot tool handover? I mean, here, just to visualize it, the idea is to understand how humans now pass on tools to other humans or to robots. And we want to use that idea to create robotic structures that could help in various environments, like, for example, surgery. So imagine a robotic nurse that could help now a surgeon getting the right tools and instruments for the operations they are carrying out. So why soft robotics now? So you might wonder why we are not looking into understanding how other tools are passed on, for example, from one human to another, and to then emulate it, understand that, learn that, and to create the appropriate mechanisms in robotic devices to achieve that. And we are looking into that. We are, for example, developing tactile sensors to actually understand what's happening when the tool is moving from one hand to another, for example, a human hand or a robot hand. But we also realize that this is not enough. It's not only about computational intelligence, it's also about the intelligence in the structure. Evolution has equipped us with, fantastic tools, our hands, and it would be, our brain by itself would be not sufficient to carry out the fantastic tasks and activities we can carry out with our hands. So what we would like to do is now to understand what else is needed apart from the computational intelligence, the artificial intelligence that sits in the computer. So we believe that intelligence also embedded in the structure itself, so embodied intelligence. And we hypothesize that a soft robot can embed this intelligence in its structure. And so we can hopefully create structures that can handle a lot of the activity that is needed to achieve, a good performance when we carry out certain tasks. And so we thought, why not go completely soft and look at soft robots, and to see whether just by going in this direction, we can create something that is actually capable of solving a number of the control problems that we have when we carry out different tasks. So I show here the octopus, 2 videos of an octopus, and really fantastic animal capable of sorting out many issues underwater, moving through very narrow openings, but also capable of using its tentacles in a very clever way, for example, to move over the floor, the sea floor there. And so, taking inspiration from that, we have created now a number of devices which I would like to show today, and hopefully we can switch over to the movies now that will come to show our experimental work in that area. And so here, why not start straight away with an octopus itself, taking the inspiration from there. And so we can see at first a number of systems that have been developed in that area, not only by us, but also by other colleagues around the world. And not only grasping devices, but also mobile robots, so walking systems and swimming systems, as we can see here. Here's even a jellyfish robot swimming underwater. In all cases, or in most cases, the idea is now to use soft materials to create these new robotic structures. And here you can see now the system that we have developed, an octopus, a robot octopus made of silicone rubber, equipped with pneumatic chambers that can be inflated to achieve the movement. You can see here a more detailed view of that. In our case, we have on the outside the silicone material, and in the inside we have two chambers, as we can see here, and these can be individually inflated by air. And if we inflate both of the chambers, the robot arm, as shown here, is bending actually in the direction of the stiffer material, so away from the softer material, one that is stiffer than the other. If we inflate only one chamber, it bends into one direction, and here now inflating the left chamber, it bends to the right direction. So by just using this very simple way of using chambers inside our robotic structures and then inflating those with air, we can achieve different types of movements. And these movements, in case of the robotic device that we have created, will lead to different types of motion. So actuating all the chambers together of all tentacles, we have forward motion, as shown here in that video. And then if we inflate only one chamber per tentacle, we have this twisting motion, as we can see here. And then finally, if we only actuate one set, so one half of the chambers of tentacles, then we can see we have this turning motion. And so that gave us quite a number of ideas and insight into what's happening. And we were able then to also create robotic hands. And I would like to present here an overview of those hands that we have created. Again, the same approach has been chosen. So in blue, we have here this small robotic hand that hopefully one day will be used as a prosthetic hand, and made of silicone material. In blue, we have the stiffer material. In yellow, you can see these chambers, and when they are inflated, the robotic device bends into the direction of the stiffer material. And so, as we can see here, very natural movement. It is controlled by a human hand. We are using a vision sensor, leap motion, that allows us to measure the movements of the human hand and to translate that into the motion of the artificial hand. We can also program special grasps, as you can see here. And I would like to stress that the programming is very simple, because it is effectively only giving an on signal, on off. And when we give pressure on, the hand will curl and will grasp the item. And that's all what it is. The control can be kept very simple. The hand itself, because it's compliant, adjusts to the object in a perfect way. And Jan Fraas is the PhD student behind that, and as we have seen here on his business card, very much instrumental to the work that we're doing here. In collaboration with him, but also with an organization in Poland, PIAP, we have now also developed a device, again, based on the same principles, that allows us to create a whole robotic arm made of silicone material. You see that at the top, and then 5 fingers are attached to it. And again, they apply the same kind of gripping mechanism that we have seen beforehand. And this system has actually been running for 2 days non-stop, and was capable to grasp the ball every time successfully. And that without any sensors built in. So by just applying the program to run it, even though the ball might not appear always in the right position, the hand adapts and is capable of grasping the ball and carrying out the task. Good. Yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I would just like to, of course, thank those who have funded this research, in particular the Alan Turing Institute. Also thank all my collaborators who have contributed, and in particular Jan Fraas, PhD student of mine at the moment, who has been behind developing these devices which we have presented today. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Casper. And we're going to have time for a couple of questions. I don't see anything on Slido just now, but please type quickly if you've got something you want to ask Casper, and I'll ask my own question while I wait for anything coming in over here. So Casper, the first question I kind of have, and I tend to have this with most researchers, but I'm always very intrigued. What's your sort of next steps of the project? Are you hoping for some more collaborations? Have you got a next sort of stage of inquiry? Like where are things going?
Yeah, so this will be, first of all, very closely linked to the current Turing project. And so here we are looking for further funding, and we really want to explore how we can take these ideas now out of the lab and bring them into the various environments that we are interested in. For example, manufacturing and surgery, where we can support the surgeon in their work, or also look at the manufacturing side, so where workers in the manufacturing environment can be supported in that way. And obviously, yeah, we are open to collaboration with industry, and we are exploring this also quite a bit. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Casper. We're going to move on to the next one. I'm not getting anything from Slido at the moment. There is a little bit of a delay, though. So if we have some questions that come through late, we'll look back to you at the end and make sure we get those in. Otherwise, I'm sure Casper will be happy to take questions over email or whatever if anyone has any direct questions.
And I will be here also at the end of the session. Yep, thank you.
Amazing. Actually, we've just had one through, so let me just quickly ask you it now from Frank. After grasping, can you determine the precise pose of the object in the hand, e.g. for precise placement?
So that's a very good question. So the answer I would like to give here is that this is not so important. So we are actually not so interested in actually getting the exact pose. What we are more interested in is to see what is the inherent compliance of the systems of the robotic hand to actually cope with variations in the environment. So traditionally, robots need to be precisely programmed to be able to carry out a grasp and fail very easily if there is a change in the environment. However, this is now, I see it as an advantage, and that would allow us to actually reduce the computational burden, and we will be able to achieve what we want to achieve, grasp the object more easily.
Thank you very much, Casper. Let's move on to the next one. As I say, we'll pull in some questions at the end if we do have some time. So next up, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Roy Ruddle from the University of Leeds. Roy is a Professor of Computing and Deputy Director of Research Technology at the Leeds Institute for Data Analytics. Roy joins us to share a demonstration of data visualization, and he poses the question, does visualization help AI or does AI help visualization? Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Gemma. So yes, I've actually turned the question around. Does AI help visualization or visualization help AI? And I'm going to answer these two by briefly demonstrating a different piece of software for each. So for the first question, does AI help visualization? There's a really lovely quote, which is, the greatest value of a picture is when it forces us to notice what we've never expected to see. And this doesn't come from a visualization specialist. It actually comes from a well-known statistician called John Turing. But it captures the absolute essence of the benefits of visualization. And in that context, the purpose of AI or data mining in general is to provide computational support for visual analysis, particularly when the data is complex. I'm going to illustrate this with some software we developed called ACE. This is for set-based data, so think Venn diagrams gone mad. In ACE, we deliberately use very ordinary visualizations, but the novelty comes through from the flow of interaction that we support and ACE's scalability. What you're seeing here is what we're using ACE for, to investigate patterns of missing data. And in hospital data, every patient should have a primary diagnosis, so that's never missing. But it's only the patients with the most complex health conditions that would require 20 different diagnostic fields. And that's why we get this ramp-like pattern of missing values. Now I'm going to demo ACE with some simulated data because I'm not allowed to show you the real data. And for simplicity for the demo, I've cut it down to 10 diagnostic fields, but you see the same general pattern here. However, if we use a heat map to look at this, then something very unusual jumps out of this. We've got the step-like pattern that we're expecting to see that's equivalent to what you saw in the bar chart, but then in addition, you've got a bunch of other combinations of missing values with holes in them, with gaps in them. This is unexpected. So if I filter out the expected patterns, now I can bring in the interactive data mining, the AI support, if you like. And first of all, I use a broad brush, calculating something called information gain ratio to try to identify which of a set of candidate fields are likely to provide an explanation. There's not a huge difference here, but the one with the greatest difference, ProCode 3, this is to do with the code for a given hospital. So I can then investigate that more deeply using calculation called entropy. Here I'm not interested in the biggest of the bars, actually I'm interested in the smallest of them because these give the cleanest split of the data. And in this case, a hospital which we've anonymized with a AAA code provides almost all of the explanation. So going back to the original data, this is what the heat map looked like with our 15 million record data set. You see the expected ramp-like pattern down here, but then you see all these other combinations of missing values with gaps in them. This was a complete surprise to the health experts that we were collaborating with. What we managed to do using ACE is to find that there was actually a needle in this haystack when we weren't expecting one to be there. It was very rare, only about 1,800 out of 15 million records, but its very presence was a surprise. What the data mining did was let us identify where this needle came from, because well over 90% of those gaps came from one particular part of one particular hospital, which is good news because you can make use of NHS Digital's existing feedback loop to improve the quality of future data for all its secondary uses in health service planning, payments, and other types of research. So that's how AI is helping visualization. What about the second question? Here I'm using a completely different piece of software called Paramarama, where Paramarama is purpose designed to help computer scientists to design and optimize their models by helping to make choices about values in the parameter space. I'm illustrating it using a cell segmentation example because it's fairly easy to follow. So when I load the data into Paramarama, I'm getting a pattern like this, where each row across here highlighted in red corresponds to a particular run of the model with a particular set of parameter values. And if you're sort of looking at this saying, what does it tell me? The answer is, well, nothing at all. This is really noise. What happens if I use sort of automated techniques to try to sort these parameter runs? I get a little bit of a pattern appearing, but it's still not very informative. So I'm going to clear that. By having interactive visualization and exploring the data, by the time I found two, or the right two parameters, I'm finding a pattern which has certain patterns in these output measures. I add in a third of the parameters, and now I'm seeing a very clear pattern. So for these three parameters, they all have an inverse relationship with this output measure that we're using over here. But this relationship is at a different scale factor. The coarsest one is for the threshold, and the finest one is for the diameter of an object, as you see these little cycles here in the output measure. Combining these objective output measures with the subjective data that I'm going to look at, and the domain knowledge that we have that the correct value is going to lie somewhere in this sort of region of this output measure, we can then actually display the computed outputs, which are each images with the where the outlines of each of the cells are superimposed on the image for us to make an inspection of it. We've reported the actual findings of this panorama work in a number of papers. Some of the people we work with have used it to improve the quality of their model output. They've made a number of breakthroughs in understanding of how the model behaves, how the parameters interact with each other. And we've also managed to help our AI partners to make a couple of insights which are really much more unusual. One was where one of my colleagues was able to identify logic errors in the software that one of the team had implemented. And the second one was where the researcher managed to determine that a long-held assumption about color deconvolution is sometimes invalid. So to round off, does AI help visualization or visualization help AI? The answer, perhaps as you would have been expecting, is both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. That was really fascinating. Thank you so much for taking us through so deeply all of your research. Really great to see it in action. Again, I'm going to be looking over at the Slido, waiting for a couple of questions to come in. I think there's maybe a little bit of a delay again, so try and type as quickly as you can so that I can try and get the questions over to Roy. But while we're waiting on that then, Roy, I wonder if you could just tell us, same question I had for Casper, what are the sort of next steps of your research? What are you kind of looking to achieve as you move forward?
The active part of the research is concerning ACE, and what we're trying to do there is to combine. We're trying to do some investigations to work out what types of automated processing are going to help in this real application data. What's unusual about the work that we do is we're developing new visualization techniques with some really quite large real-world anonymized health data sets. So they're very, very rich. We're trying to work with NHS Digital to come up with techniques that they could use to implement within their normal data lifecycle checks. And so you can imagine that there are many challenges associated with that, which you don't find when you're just trying to do a simple evaluation in a university lab.
Thank you very much, Roy. Again, I'm going to wait to the end to see if any questions come through, and we'll pull you back in. At the moment, I'm still waiting for them to feed through. So while we wait, let's move on to our final presentation of this section. Originally was going to be both Flora and Richard, but just Richard today. So let me introduce Richard Milton. He is a senior research fellow at the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at UCL, and they're going to showcase QUANT AI in urban planning scenarios. Richard, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. Hi. Okay, so I'm Richard Milton. I work for the UCL Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of something that we called QUANTscape. Now, QUANTscape is a development of a project called QUANT, which I currently work on at UCL. QUANT is a project that's run by Professor Mike Batty, and it's a collaboration between the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at UCL and the Urban Analytics strand at the Alan Turing. Now, QUANT stands for Quantitative Urban Analytics. Now, the QUANT model is actually an online model. It's something that's called a gravity model. And what QUANT does is it trains on the 2011 census data, and it's called a travel to work model. So we know all the zones where people live, and we know the zones where people work, and we know the flows between them. So it's trained to approximate that with a model. It's a big model because it represents the whole of the UK. The idea that we had behind QUANT was that we wanted to create a demonstrator that we could take to a conference or an exhibition. So what you see in the image here is the original QUANT website, which is a more scientific interface. but it's running on a 55-inch touch table that we were intending to take to conferences. So, for example, the AIUK conference. But of course, no conferences are happening now with COVID, and the table is currently quarantined in the British Library. However, here is some artwork that was designed by my colleague Flora Roumpani, and I think you can see her background as an architect coming through here. So I'm a computer scientist. I deal with the computational nature of the model. She's more of an architect, and Mike Batty is the expert in urban modeling. And it's really a collaboration between the three things. It's very much a cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary project. Now, you can see immediately from this, QUANT is a big model, as I said. It's designed to model large-scale infrastructure. Now, it's a model of people traveling to work. And it's called a gravity model because big things attract more than smaller things. So if you've got a zone with a large number of jobs in it, it will attract more than a zone with a small number of jobs. And similarly, if your travel to that zone is faster, it'll attract more than if you have to travel a long way. So what QUANT can do is to do large-scale infrastructure planning. So what you see on the map here is actually an HS2 plan. So it can do either changes to the underlying network structure or changes to the underlying employment structure. But to do that, it requires the rail, bus and road networks for the whole of the UK, as well as flows of people for the whole of the UK. There's actually 427 million floating point values that go into every model run that we do. And you can see the QUANTscape idea here. The idea was to get people all around a table discussing a plan, playing with it, and it's supposed to be tangible. So you put tangible objects onto the table, and it's a thing that you can play with interactively in real time. And for that, we need computational efficiency. So first thing I'm going to show you is Heathrow Extension. So let's build an airport. So this is the view that you would normally see on the table, although on the table we'd rotate it by 90 degrees. So if we zoom in, so there's Sipson where the airport is going, the new runway is going to go for Heathrow Airport. So we put an object on the table. So this represents the tangible object. Now this is a 15% uplift in any zones that are covered by this area of activity. So if we twist the object, we can increase the area. So we run the model, and this is what we get. So take the object off the table, and what we're looking at here is basically where we would expect the uplift in house prices to be. So if I zoom back a little bit so that you can see it a bit more. In real life, you would run this with something called constraints on, because there are greenbelt constraints, and I'm going to show that later. But I wanted to show the idea that the gravity model, it's spreading the effectiveness out along the transport links. So rail links, bus links, and road links separately. So we can look at this, which is the people who are going to commute by rail to these new jobs. So we've added 27,000 jobs in here, and this is where it's more accessible to get to by rail. But more telling is this map here. So we know where people live, so we know their origin zones, and we know where people are going to work, which is their destination zone, and we know the distance between them. So we can work out the total commute distance that we're adding by adding these jobs in. So by just taking the road mode from the model separately. Now, it turns out that for our 27,000 jobs here, we've added 140,000 kilometers of road for those people to commute every day to those jobs. You can multiply that up by a fairly well-known factor, because that's your CO2 budget right there. And I tend to work in road kilometers rather than tons of CO2, because CO2 is a very large number. Tons of CO2 is massive numbers. Road kilometers is a lot easier to visualize. Now, this is where I had a question. I wonder, because if you add people, if you add employment, you're always attracting people to that employment. So if you attracted 0 people driving to that employment, then the road kilometer uplift would be 0. But that's not really a realistic situation. What we actually want to do is to achieve a mode shift. Now, this is a good example of the interactivity of the QuantScape table, because by being able to run these models very quickly, instead of running a model run which would take sort of 2 hours or maybe even an overnight run, you can discover that if you move the center location of the airport slightly to the southwest and then increase its effectiveness from an 8K radius to a 10K radius, you still add about 27,000 jobs in, but you can actually drop the number of people traveling by road, because you see the blue and the red there. It's affected a very good mode shift, and that is a classic mode shift pattern. They've moved from the west of the map where it's blue to the east of the map where it's red. Now, in real terms, I can see a console that you can't see that tells me that's a drop of 35,000 kilometers on the road. It's not huge, but I'd take that if that was a better plan. So that leads me to ask the question, what makes a good design? And I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I'm going to come back to this map at the very end. But the idea was that with the interactivity of the QuantScape table and the speed of being able to run these models very quickly, interactivity and the immediate urban modeling that we can do, we can show AI-driven hints to the people making the maps. Now, to cut a long story short, the red areas here are where, when we run batches of 30,000 scenario runs, these are where we get the most good effects. So the red areas might be where you want to be looking. And there's a myriad of different statistics that we can use to give to the person as a hint as to what might make a good scenario, or even optimize using the AI system in real time. So demo 2, let's build a railway. So this is Oxford to Cambridge. So this is what they call the Camcox corridor. I've got Oxford bottom left and Cambridge top right and Milton Keynes in the middle. So if we just pull out like a high-speed two-speed rail link. So this is a very fast high-speed link. Now on the quant table, what you would do is put objects onto the table, but you can see what I'm doing there is I'm pulling it out with a mouse. Now, when we run the model, we get more or less what you'd expect to see. The biggest effect, the biggest attraction is right in the middle of the map where Milton Keynes happens to sit. And that's true of all, all network scenarios. Where you have the most network links, you get the most benefit, because network links equals potential for getting to jobs. So it's job accessibility, pure and simple. The two ends are good, but the middle's better. If you switch that to just the rail mode, you see what you expect to see. You see the big effect in the middle. It's attracting most people in Milton Keynes. But you can see the two islands at the either end. You can see the Oxford Island and the Cambridge Island. Now, if we go to the road, so this is numbers of people and where they live. So this is numbers of people, where they live, and only the people that would drive using their cars. So again, if you look at the arc, you see on the Oxford-Cambridge arc, you can see it's all blue. And so what you're seeing is that by building a big high-speed rail link, it's attracting people off of the car and onto the rail, because the rail is becoming more attractive. It's a gravity effect, pure and simple. Now, from this, we can generate a gallery of scenarios. So the one on the left here, this is the Heathrow residential population. It's the same map I showed before, but this one is run using the government's analysis of Heathrow. So this is the 52,000 jobs in exactly the zones that they predicted the jobs to be in, with the green belt. So you see there's a black sort of band down the middle there, on sort of left of middle. That's the green belt. And so what you're seeing is people all being pushed into the centre of London, because there can be no development on the green belt. And it just happens that the runway sits right on the green belt. The map on the right, this is a high-speed 2 map. Again, look at the green line, which shows where the network changes are. So London up to Birmingham, nothing, because you can't get on or off the HS2 link anywhere between Euston and Birmingham. So there's no real benefit. It's just a fast line taking people out of London into Birmingham, and then from Birmingham upwards, you see the benefit where people can get on and off of these links. Again, this is road kilometres saved. So what it's showing you here is that the bright areas where more people are being attracted away from cars onto HS2. And so these other two projects here, again on the left, I've got HS2. That's a residential population map. So you see people are being attracted to the places where they can get on and off HS2. So around all of the new stations that are being built. And then the map on the right is showing geometry. So that's a Crossrail map. So Crossrail is a fast rail link from Reading right the way across London to Shinfield. And it's just purely showing geometry. And it's showing how a change in London can have an effect, all the way out into the southwest of the country, potentially. It shows how widespread these effects are. And it justifies the use of a model, as big as QUANT is. So to finish up, I've got the future. So these are Monte Carlo simulations. What we've done is, because we've got a very fast way of running simulations, computational efficiency is giving us the interactivity. We needed that for the original QUANT. That was how we sort of stumbled into this. And then the QuantScape table, again, you've got to present results to people very fast. But it's this speed that is allowing us to do lots of batches of scenario runs. So this is a run of 30,000 scenarios. And this is how I produced the map that I skimmed over before. It's a run of 30,000 scenarios. Now, when I was running employment scenarios, I noticed that all the employment scenarios were all extremely bad in terms of carbon, because you add 50,000 jobs, people are always going to commute, almost always going to commute by car. Some of them are, it's the law of averages. So I wondered if it was possible to offset that somehow. And I wondered if it was possible to run a simulation where you could show that it was possible to reduce jobs in one place and increase jobs in another. And so what this runs, the exploded maps on the right, it's a slightly strange view of the UK, but these are edited highlights from the 30,000 simulation that we ran all over the UK. So the idea is, coming back to our analogy of the QuantScape table, it's like a game. You can put red counters on the table or blue counters on the table. So the red counters increase the employment in that zone by 1,000. The blue reduce it by 1,000. You spin the wheel and then see where your Monte Carlo simulation comes out. Do you win or lose? And so for all of these simulations, what we do is we run an optimization. So we want the jobs to be round about zero or increasing the number of jobs. We want the distance on the road, so this is our carbon budget, to be round about zero or to be, in the negative range, so better. And we want the changes to be all around, a geographically, centered area. So we don't want one up in the north of Scotland and one down in the southwest of Cornwall. What we want is a small change and a small change down and a big change up. We want them to be locally so that they're offsetting each other. The idea being that if you could migrate people, they're not going to want to migrate a large distance. They're only going to want to migrate a little distance. But the idea is to create this mode change. And that's what the map shows. It's a ranked map. So when we run these 30,000 simulations, the red areas on the map are the areas where, using that zone as a starting point and making changes from that zone downwards, these are where we get the most positive effects. These are the places where we think we can affect the most change. But all of this is it's very early work. It's very much research work, and we don't know a lot of the answers to these questions at the moment. I mean, how we search what is a very big input space is still very much an open question. We're doing it using something called Monte Carlo search. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening. And these are the three people working on the project, myself, Flora, and Professor Michael Batty. And this is the website, so quant.casa.ucl.ac.uk is the web-based quant. And within about a month or so, there'll be a new version of that. So watch this space for a new quant. And with that, I'm going to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was utterly fascinating. And we've got a couple of questions that have come through on the Slido for you. And I think this is probably one that's top of a lot of people's lists, considering we're talking about commuting and jobs and where people are in the country. Has more working from home, both during and after the pandemic, been factored into the model?
Okay. This is an interesting question. Now, Mike has written a lot of papers with me and with Roberto Murcio, who is another one of the researchers on the project. These guys are experts in urban modeling. Now, QUANT is what they call an equilibrium model. So it's built to use the data from the 2011 census. So I'm going to answer this question in a slightly roundabout way. Short answer is no, it doesn't. Long answer is we can make the changes to simulate as if it does. So I wrote a Chi paper which tried to do just that. It took all the big working zones and dropped the employment down in those working zones. The other thing we can do is we can reduce commuting down to zero. So, the model that it's built from doesn't represent working from home, but working from home is a scenario in itself. And I mean, there's a huge discussion about how you run a scenario like this. And of course, I'm a computer scientist. Usually I say go and ask an urban modeler. I know my limits. I want to throw something into the mix here and say I've just answered the census questions. Now, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm worried because the census that this is based on, they ask the question, where do you live, where do you work? Now, I've just answered, I live here, I work here. Does this mean that the flow statistics that we rely on for the 2021 census are non-existent? I don't know the answer to that yet.
That's a really interesting question, considering how few censi, if that's the plural of censuses, is. If we're going to do it in the middle of a pandemic and then things change within a year, what does that mean for data in general for the next little while? Very interesting provocation. Let's move on to the next question, one from Rob Parker. Does this include all the other important factors like hospitals, schools, etc., needed if people relocate?
Right, no. Generally, you model one thing at a time. Now, we were doing something for the RAMP project, which is the Turing's COVID project, where we modeled exactly that. Now, gravity models are used for a lot of things. I mean, we use it to model, we were modeling people going to schools, hospitals, and what was the other one? There was two, there was primary school, secondary school, hospital, retail, obviously. Retail is the other big one. So we were modeling those three separately. I think that the answer to that is that you would use a model like this to then work out where people are going to live, and then you'd use another model also like this, but slightly different, using different input data. We have a project, there's another project that's run, which is modeling, exactly that in Oxford. We've modeled it for RAMP. So, yes, you'd run them as parallel models.
Awesome. Another question here from Ian Morgan. Do you take into account topological features such as rivers, road designation, etc.?
Okay, that's an interesting question. It probably comes out in the travel to work statistics. I mean, I can say yes in terms of greenbelt areas of outstanding natural beauty, because you can't build on them. So I suppose to break that into two parts, you've got two questions there. Firstly, can you commute through the obstacle? Now, in terms of rivers, big mountains, we've got the entire road network for the UK. We know the road speeds for the entire road network. So we can route a person from any position to any position in the UK fairly accurately. So that's physical. The same with rail networks. It's a problem because rail networks can be sparse networks. Getting on and off rail can be a problem. And bus networks, again, a bit like the road network. We've got all the bus networks. We know how long it takes to get from A to B. We also know if you're going out to Scottish Islands or you're commuting, say you're going to the Isle of Wight, Scilly Isles, things like that. What we do, we fold. If you're going by road, we have to fold the water network into the rest of the networks. Strangely enough, they're actually held on the bus network. So links out to all the Scottish Islands are parts of the bus network. So that gets folded into the roads. So that's all taken care of. In terms of how long does it take to get up the side of a mountain, or would you build a new development on the side of the mountain? That's not something that we consider in here. But I should mention a colleague of mine that I've worked with. He's called Carl Steinitz, and he does something called geodesign. And it was him that showed me there are maps that we can include into this of things like historic battlefields, other things that you can't build on, basically. The eye-opener for me was, you think you can't build on the side of a mountain, but you also wouldn't build on prime agricultural land because you wouldn't put a motorway on it because it's prime agricultural. You want to keep it for agricultural. So it was an eye-opener seeing what he does with his geodesign projects. I think that there's a case for putting all of this into the sort of AI that Quant does, because when I show me pulling out a big network link, I'm just blasting a network link A to B straight across. Now, my thinking was that if you want to build HS2, you're thinking, okay, it's a back of an envelope calculation. How fast is it going to be to get from Euston to Birmingham? You're not so worried about, which bits of Euston do I bulldoze? Yeah, you want to know first, is it worth doing? And then secondly, this is where my colleague Flora also comes in. She's an architect, so she knows about building real stuff. There's is it worth it? And then there's can I build it in real life? So I think it comes into that. And yes, we have all that information. And it's an eye-opener if you look at it. So wonder you can build anything at all in the UK when you see these maps.
Amazing, Richard. I'm afraid we've run out of time for any more questions in this session. But if anyone, there's a few I know on Slido that I haven't got to for all of the speakers. So if there's any questions you have, I'm sure the speakers would be happy for you to contact them directly, or perhaps if they're in the hop in later on, maybe there's some networking that can be done. I'm sure you know the story by now. But thank you so much to Casper, to Richard, and to Roy for all of your presentations. It's been totally fascinating to see all of your research, and great for the audience to get involved and ask these questions as well. We really appreciate it.